So hello and welcome to today's panel on cybersecurity in retail, hosted by George Mason University Center for Retail Transformation and sponsored by Microsoft. My name is Dr. Gautam Wadkepat, and it's my distinct pleasure to welcome you to the final panel for this academic year on the critical topic of cybersecurity in retail. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we get things started. Thanks to the audience who are joining us. If you have any questions, please use the Q&A session to post the questions, and Nirup and I will get to the questions and post them to the panelists as appropriate. Today's panel is moderated by Dr. Nirup Menon, the Professor of Information Systems and Operations Management at George Mason University's School of Business. Nirup teaches information security management at GMU, and he conducts research on the economics of information security. So he is the expert on this topic. Nirup, thank you for graciously agreeing to help steer this discussion. And without further ado, let's meet the panelists who have joined us from different parts of the country to share their experience and expertise and to give us some kind of a fundamentals of cybersecurity in retail. So let's go around the room in alphabetical order, maybe to kick things off. And I'm going to turn my camera off and let you all take it away. Maybe Arjun, you can start things off.
Yeah, sounds good. Thank you all for having me. Thank you for setting this panel up. My name is Arjun DeBeer. I'm the Security Director for Retail and Consumer Goods at Microsoft in our enterprise segment. So my team focuses on all of the Microsoft security capabilities that help our retailers accelerate their digital transformation journey and get them into the cloud, as well as reducing their overall attack surface. Spent 13 years at Microsoft across various different roles, everything from consulting services to incident response, and now in the sales organization. So a lot of experience working with very large retailers across the world, and has built kind of a plethora of experience that I lend to for this panel.
Thank you, Arjun. Caroline?
Hi, my name is Caroline. Thanks again for having me on this panel. It's great to be here. I have a long career as a data privacy and cybersecurity attorney, working with various businesses of all kinds, including retail. And then I also happen to have started my own company that is a data privacy and cybersecurity business that is focused on supply chain risk. And we work exclusively with virtual chief information security officers, building cybersecurity programs. And I also host a podcast called the Virtual CISO Chronicles. So I'm glad to be here and I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Caroline. Cy?
Hey everybody, I am Cy Fenton. So I'm I guess the retail practitioner on this panel. So most recently I was the CISO, the Chief Privacy Officer, and the Senior VP of Infrastructure, Global Infrastructure for Ralph Lauren. I left there post-pandemic, and now I'm running a consultancy group doing strategic IT consulting, virtual CIO and virtual CISO, and security engagements for retailers. I've been a retailer for 30-something years as a CIO first, and then a CISO, and then also I, until very recently, was the chairman of the National Retail Federation's IT Security Council, which is the largest group in retail of IT security professionals. We function similarly as a community to like an ISAC, and we all get together and talk about retail security related incidents. I was the chairman of that group for 10 years.
Thank you, Cy. Saurabh?
Thanks for having me on this panel. Thank you. So I've been with TCS for 22 years. That's my whole career. I'm managing the security and compliance for Microsoft Business Unit within TCS. We engage with different customers and different, we help them either in their cloud journey, how to run the security programs, how to run the compliance program, help them. Each customer is at a different stage, and I work across different business verticals. So I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you, Saurabh. Okay, so let's start off. The first question is on basically the challenges that the retail industry faces on managing information security. So according to Verizon's 2022 data breach report, the retail industry reported 629 security incidents and 241 confirmed data breaches in 2022. Even one such incident is not conducive to engendering trust among consumers for retail operations. So can you give us an overview of what you think are the challenges that the industry faces in managing cybersecurity? So we'll start with the retail expert and then go to the legal expert and then go to the solutions experts. So Sai?
Sure. Well, so retail in terms of cybersecurity, retail is not that much different than the rest of the business landscape. So ransomware is a serious threat today, sort of more so than most any others. And for us, ransomware it has kind of got a three-pronged effect. It's customer data, that we're worried about. It's associate data that we're worried about, and then it's operations, right? So on the customer and associate data, you're talking about, we lose control of, and that stuff gets ransomed. Not only are we not able to operate, and I'll talk about that in just a second, but we lose the customer's trust, right? When they've given us information about themselves, and it's not just name and phone number and address. It's a lot of personal information about them, what sizes they are. A lot of retailers are storing, all kinds of geospatial data. So as the apps stream in geodata coming off the apps, we know where you've gone and where you've been and when you're in our stores, and transaction data of all kinds. Same thing for the associate data. We don't really worry too much about HIPAA in retail, but right. We do have related data that is health related, and a lot of personal related, kid related data, and families and such. So those two bits of data in terms of ransomware and getting out there in the ecosphere are very concerning. And then the last one that I think we really are starting to focus on more is just it's not really data, but it's about operations, right? So ransomware and malware in general, if it's executed well by the bad guy, can take your whole operation down. And if we're down for a day, a week, or longer, it has very, very serious consequences in terms of overall, just a monetary hit to the business and consumer confidence too, right? Depending on what kind of retailer you are, if somebody walks in and your cash registers aren't working, they'll just go to your competitor. So those are sort of the three areas that have a lot of currency today in retail.
Thank you, Sai. Caroline, would you like to add something to that?
Yeah, I mean, I sort of want to double down a little bit on what Sai just said, which is the breadth and the depth of the data that is available in retail, right? And we're talking about highly regulated areas. So financial data is involved here. As Sai said, it's not necessarily health protected information, but it is tangential to that. And we're talking about, potentially kids' data. We're talking about people's homes, where they live. It's such a huge amount of data to oversee. But then also, as Sai mentioned, you can be talking about what's online, so website and what's going on in an online environment, and also physically in-store type of environment. So we really are talking about a whole host of potential threat vectors that can be affecting this particular industry.
Saurabh?
Yeah, I think these are the great points. And when we talk about threats are many, I'll just add on to what Sai mentioned. Same way, the way complexity of systems are increasing today, so the threats are. When the data flow from one system to other system, how it is captured, and the complexity of attacks are also being very advanced now. If I take examples here for the point of sale systems, there is a lot of security built in for the contactless, touchless transactions. But when these small malware that sits in the system, the defected ones, then the touchless doesn't work. And that's a little bit of play around social engineering as well, that if my card doesn't work for twice, probably thrice, I'll just go in and insert my card, and the skimming through the data is captured. So From threat perspective, there are many, including the insider threats, or we talked a little bit on that. It's not only stealing the information. How attackers are able to kind of play around with people who are working, and specifically in this industry, there's a lot of temporary workforce come in, part-time people come in who don't understand the criticality and the consequences of the information which can be shared. And it could be store operations itself, who is managing, who is who, what is what, how operations are run. Very small, very, very small basic information, but it can impact if somebody wants to exploit that. So I think in the retail, because it's a very labor intensive operations end to end, I think this people aspect is also one of the key things which I see it as one of the critical threats.
Thank you, sir. Arjun, yeah.
Yeah, I'll touch on, I think, Sai and Saurabh and Caroline all mentioned valid points around ransomware. I think we've all seen the proliferation of ransomware across the spectrum. And I think that's going to change a little bit, right? So as more bad actors get added to sanction lists, as whether it's OFAC or the SEC or the FBI start enforcing new policies on how organizations can either pay for ransomware or not pay for ransomware situations, we'll get a better determination as what to the future is. What we're starting to see is a lot of acceleration into other sorts of commodity type attacks, which include fake domains, right? And so during COVID, there was a rush for a lot of retailers to move online, create an e-commerce presence if they hadn't had one, or accelerate their e-commerce presence to drive things like buy online, obtain in store, and so forth. And what we're starting to see is a lot of scenarios where bad actors are creating fake domains very similar to the primary retailer site, and using that to copy exactly what the retailer's physical and online presence looks like, and then use that to then basically scam people into buying things that they are not actually buying. And so in that situation, the unknowing consumer goes through the process of buying what they think they're buying from a well-reputed retailer, not noticing that maybe the domain name of that retailer's website is a little off. And then, a few days later, waiting to see where their product is being delivered, and then they don't get it. And so they're scammed out of, hundreds, maybe thousands of dollars, depending on what their situation is. So that's a new type of attack pattern that we're seeing. I think insider threat is actually a growing issue, especially in the United States, related to frontline worker scenarios. As Saurabh mentioned, there's a lot of transactional scenarios where a lot of frontline workers work in multiple retailers at the same time. And so in that situation, they are looking for ways to maximize not only their compensation, but also maximize what they're getting out of that retailer. So we're seeing a lot of gift card fraud, a lot of, the room here is set to a lot of gift card fraud, a lot of other scenarios where they're trying to steal, even though they're working as employees for that organization.
Yeah, I feel that, yes.
I was good. Go ahead. And I just have one thing I want to say at the end here.
Okay. No, I was just going to ask, I feel that a lot of your responses touched upon confidentiality of data as well as availability of data. And retailers probably also worry about integrity of their own data, right? The three pillars on which information security stands. And especially because retailers have so many partners whom they work with, they have to share either data, they have to get their data from manufacturers, they have to give data to analysts or other consulting companies. So, there must be a lot of challenges there as well. So can we talk a little bit about those?
Absolutely. I was actually going to mention sort of one of the big changes over the last 10 years, beyond the fact that we all have much better security related infrastructures, primarily thanks to Microsoft, I would say, by the way. Let me give a big call out. I used to not be a fan of the Microsoft backend platforms, and it's not your father's Microsoft anymore. So those tools are fantastic. But I think one of the big changes is, 5 years ago, even, or 6 or 7, we might have had 10 outside third parties that were involved in the operation of our IT organizations. Now we have 200 or more, and it runs the gamut from, you know, somebody like a TCS who might take the whole thing on for us, to a tiny little widget that is running on a website that is, you know, is providing, you know, some sort of additional data augmentation to our existing data that lives with yet another third party. And the truth of the matter is, whether we're talking about moving off into public cloud environments or hosted platform as a service kinds of environments, or you know, just straight up things like Shopify, all of those are now have extended our threat surface area out into sort of way more places than we ever knew before, and I think that's a huge challenge. In my role, you know, I'm the last 2 years I've been going in and doing virtual or interim CTO jobs for direct to consumer companies, a number of which you guys would know, and these companies are all been formed in the last 5 or 6 years, and they're moving at such a rapid pace and just spreading their data out everywhere that they don't even have a good inventory of where everything is. And you know, as we start to assess where everything lives, that's a really, really important piece, is just knowing where it all is. It sounds really dumb and really basic, but that can be one of the hardest jobs to start with, is getting to know and understand where everything is. The newer or the more mature companies, and while I was at Ralph, we had a great program that do this. I'm sure Caroline might be able to speak to this. You know, part of that, the maturing of the InfoSec within organizations, is making sure that legal is our partner, right? Because we have to have with all these different groups out there that are accessing and helping us to provide a great customer experience, we have to have the right legal arrangements involved with them. And I'll let Caroline say a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, you're teeing me up for my soapbox that I like to stand on all the time.
Go for it.
But absolutely, I mean, with the way that regulations are going, you know, as we're seeing in the United States, data privacy has become a big movement for on a state-by-state basis this year. You know, we don't only have California, but Virginia, Colorado, Utah, Tennessee. I mean, it's just Texas. It just keeps going on and on and on about the privacy laws that are either being teed up in their respective states or passing. And what's happening is this communication gap between legal privacy and information security, where you have, you know, in typical legal documents, now you have information security requirements being added in. And so that collaboration, that discussion, that working together is more critical than ever, because the last thing you want is to have a whole host of information security requirements that legal is saying, I don't really understand, sounds good to me, makes sense, seems reasonable. And you go to the information security team and they are answering something else from that same potential customer that says, no, we don't do this. So
right.
I completely agree with you. So you could have said it better, that the risk of the supply chain and the vendors, and like Walmart, I believe, has thousands of vendors. It's an insane problem. And I do believe it's one of the biggest risks in this industry.
Yeah.
I was going to say, sorry, go ahead. You go ahead.
No, I think adding on to the supply chain risk, I think the other big issue is fourth party risk assessments, right? And not only just who are your vendors or who are your suppliers, but who are your vendors and suppliers, right? Because majority of the time we're now in a scenario where organizations are pulling raw materials, resources, and others from a multitude of other vendors that they don't know where they're pulling that data from. And so we're just in a scenario where it's now up to not only the retail organization to go do a third-party supply chain assessment, but now do also a fourth-party supply chain assessment. And it becomes really hard at that point to really assess where is the risk associated with the information that is leaving the organization, unless you can control that by forcing all of your suppliers, like Walmart did, where they force everybody to come into their environment to access information and take customer data. So that is one thing that is very prevalent across the industry.
Yeah, I think I'll just add on to that, that when we talk about this, again, I see everything driven by data. So all these providers, whatever services we are taking, who is touching my system, who is touching the system, how they're touching it, and for what purposes. So we start from there. So vendor management process is one, and in today's world, we have to have a lot of, like I mentioned, the number of the providers, the number of partners are increasing. So I think when we go back to the basics, who is accessing my data for what purposes that I have seen, and we are helping with some of our customers to defining this. What is a critical data? What is a critical system? And then how people are connecting to them. That is one piece. Second, I think we should leverage, and that's what we advise people as well to our customer, that we should leverage compliance. You can put some basic check marks, and whoever provider we are hiring, that they have to comply to these things. So that kind of part of risk mitigation, you offload that to responsibility to them, and then there's a third party who is verifying that. And third is clearly communicating what is expected. I have seen that, when 2 decades old, if you see the contract, they were like 20 pages or max 30 pages. And now contract pages are running at like, I don't know, maybe 800 pages, sometimes crossing. So it is important that we clearly articulate a lot of time, and we have been engaged to an incident where one of our the partner of our customer, they were clear, they were complying, this is what their practice is, that was not what they're supposed to do, and it caused an incident and breach, and unfortunately got picked up in an audit. So we had to spend a lot of time. Then we realized, and customer realized, that it was not clearly, now both parties are right, but it was not clearly communicated. So it's very important when contracts are signed, clearly said you have to comply with these things. These are the evidences you need, or produce these certificates for audit reports and whatsoever. That helps a lot.
Thank you, Saurabh. Sai, did you want to add something that you were previously going to talk about?
I just think this conversation is great, and we're sort of verging off away from sort of the old school of way thinking about security, where we just want to be CISOs used to think, well, we're just going to keep everybody out, and we're going to have 100% perfect security related controls. The truth of the matter is those don't exist anymore, and so this conversation is more about risk than it is about security, right? And I think it's really important for us to think about that. You guys, a lot of you are on in the business school, and as we sort of take a modern approach to dealing with the cybersecurity threat, we really need to think about the risk pieces of it, right? And that sort of Arjun talked about that, right? Like we didn't even have a word for fourth party risk, and now we're talking about fourth party risk, in the last couple of years, and I think it's just a super important piece to be considering. The other thing I would really strongly consider, and we touched on that, so Rob touched on it, was that we need to be thinking as cybersecurity professionals about the resiliency of our systems and how to get back online. Because the truth of the matter is, at least from the technical perspective, our main role in an incident is to stop the bleeding and get the systems back online. And at least from my point of view, a modern CISO in an incident has to be thinking about resiliency and how to get everything, sort of back up and running, and know and understand, sort of in those 200 partners or more that are doing something within our organization, whether it's online or in the store or wherever. We sort of don't make those distinctions anymore. But which of those partners could be offline for some amount of time, or we would take them out of the loop, so to speak, in order to continue business, right? And so that's a big piece of our planning, is knowing and understanding that, and then being able to come back to the business and say, okay, well, if we have an incident or a response in these areas, this is what we do. Here's how to get all back online. I'd be curious to hear how the rest of the team thinks about that.
Yeah, so I think we should continue on the risk assessment part, risk management part of it. So one of the key points you mentioned is resiliency, right? How would you allocate, let's say, resources in trying to assess, especially new technologies? New technologies are coming in at a breakneck speed into the retail organization. How can retailers, so think of it from a retailer's perspective, how can they prepare themselves to manage the risk, to understand the risk that these new technologies provide or cause? So if you can talk a little bit about that, that'd be great.
Well, as a retailer, we have to have partners to help us with that. Right? I think the security functions are the most technical, and if you lack a technical understanding of the infrastructure and the complexity of the infrastructure, then you're not going to be a very successful, at least a security leader. You might have your role here and there, but really, like, in order to manage and work on response, it's a highly technical deal, because the bad guys are super technical, right? And they're using these arcane bugs, and they're also using things like, like social engineering and other things to get into our orgs. But at the end of the day, it's a highly technical org, so you got to have those people. I think the other thing that you really need to think about is how can you leverage a larger perspective? So, one of my passions I mentioned earlier was the NRF IT Security Council and the community of IT security professionals, utilizing groups like that and services where you could potentially crowdsource and get some of these third-party assessments done. That's what we did in my last two jobs. Is we utilized a third-party crowdsourcing for doing our GRC, which is governance, requirements and controls group. So anyway, regulations and controls. So anyway, those are tools that we can use to know and understand. And then, of course, the legal tools, Caroline, one of the things that I've seen a big change in is it all starts with legal, and legal and the IT group always got left to the very last, on contracts. And nowadays we're starting at the beginning. So if we can start with legal, get everything down the way we want it to do, and then get the assessments done with some of our great partners, that's the path forward, in my view.
So it's interesting that as we were talking, there were two questions that came in on AI, and I know that Caroline wanted to speak to this because you had come off mute a little while ago, and Arjun is also typing an answer. But I will let Caroline answer the question on how is AI affecting cybersecurity for retail.
Compared to the issues now, which is interesting.
Yeah.
That you added that little added extra. So when I think of AI, I think of it in three different ways. There's the bad actors who are using AI to attack. There's the AI that your company may be developing itself, and then there's the AI that you may be using through vendors of some kind. So, AI has been around for a while. It's become a very popular topic because of generative AI. The thing about generative AI that I have been warning people about that I think is really important in cybersecurity, and this is not just for retail, although I believe Arjun mentioned this before, which is there's now a massive amount of phishing attacks that can happen that are much more sophisticated because the AI can generate the content in a way that now you fall for it much more easily. And then also the AI can, and this is what Arjun said, is it can generate these fake domains very, very quickly and easily. And so you get lured in by the phishing, and then you go to this fake domain. And so I think it is affecting obviously all industries. And I think with AI, if you think about it in that framework I laid out at the beginning, the three different areas, it's important for us to come up with processes. And I'm going to tag on to a little bit on the risk assessment thing. Is the way you do risk assessments, whether it's AI or anything else, is through really good process.
Yeah, and that's a great aspects, Caroline. I think one other thing that we're starting to see a lot in terms of AI is the training sets that customers are using. So KYC, know your customer, is a pretty large prevalent theme in retail, helps retailers really figure out how to, advertise better, market to customers, as well as, find where the inventory should be and so forth. And they're using these large data sets that they've pulled with KYC and pulling them into AI models, right? Then they're shipping them out to third-party vendors, other sorts of places where they don't exactly know where that data is sitting. So the risk of using AI pulling in a retailer's information and then sending it out to a third-party vendor puts them in a situation where there's a lot of risk associated with that. And I think that's where you're going to start to see a lot of privacy issues, a lot of data integrity issues, a lot of scenarios where AI training sets are starting to find random information that shouldn't be there. And so I think that's where the biggest issue is right now, is minimizing the exposure related to customer and consumer data inside your environment when you're starting to use AI. And then, as you mentioned, right, the fake domains that I talked about earlier, but there's another new attack pattern that's starting to happen is phishing invoices, right? And this is a new type of attack pattern. Historically, phishing attacks happen across the organization, but this is more kind of like a spear phishing attack, where a bad actor will send a fake invoice to somebody in accounts receivable or accounts payable, and they will create an invoice that looks exactly like the invoice of a vendor or a partner that retailer is using. And they use AI to create this, right? So the exact same images, the exact same text, and then they ship it out to as many unsuspecting retailers as possible. And then whoever pays that invoice is, short a couple $1,000s or a couple $1 million. But that's the kind of attacks that we're seeing with a lot of AI.
This one specifically, this attack, even on larger consumer base also they are attacking. I have received these kind of texts on my phone that I was surprised. I was checking with my wife, what is this? Because sometimes we don't know who is doing the shopping.
Right.
So this is, and it's pretty sophisticated. It's very hard, very hard. Therefore, one point I wanted to add on AI, I see a lot of, not a lot, but recently we have observed that people who are working technology people, when they are developing apps or the interfaces or API integration, even they are downloading this ChatGPT because it becomes so easy now, and people are trying to play around and they give good results. But when it comes, that is also impacted. So you need to figure out where from you're downloading this code and who is helping you and what kind of information going in along within your code. And it's very dangerous because it goes inside the code. Yeah. And then it's not, the attacks are not like they go in and out and steal something or disrupt something. They go and sit in hibernation mode. They want to observe, they see the pattern, and then attack whenever they want, and then they spread in the system. And I also wanted to touch base on an earlier point on IT before we went to the AI part, and this is very recent, is spending or the structure. See, I met a customer, retailer, not very large. And when I walked in the room, they invited us to discuss on something for the cloud journey. And when we started asking questions, there were 3 people: infrastructure head, security compliance head, who was the first time appointed in their history. And then the third person was engineering head. He was also new. So what we found that this company was trying to do things by themselves. They used to get people on board one technology, do something, then do something. So they kind of created, for lack of word, created a mess of their system, and that they don't know what to do now. So my recommendation, strong recommendation, is that seek help, take help. There are a lot of companies out there who are specialized in niche skills, niche areas. Take help, at least get the advice and consulting where it should be go. And I have seen that pattern in many, many places. So don't try to save money, but they end up spending more actually later.
Thank you, sir. Very good advice for our retailers in our audience. So, while I have some prepared questions, I'd like to rather have audience participation. So let's answer some of the questions in the Q&A. So, for example, Samir asks, how often do you perform assessments? Do you have any advice for him?
Well, I'm a big fan of assessment frameworks. I used to not be, but I'm a big fan now, and so I recommend that people do an initial assessment. I really like the Center for Internet Security's Controls V8. They're a great combination of controls effectiveness and program maturity, and you end up with an objective score that you can talk to the board and other places. But then after you've done that initial assessment, you end up with a score that you can keep bumping up, and it becomes sort of a continual assessing. Really, you're never going to do that, right? But if you can get the whole team starting to think about security and then break it down, and all these control frameworks do this, right? There's 100 and something controls, and they're around very specific things. And if you can make improvements around those specific things and have a plan, then you end up with a continuous assessment process that will feed back into a more mature security posture. So that's, I don't know if that answers it.
I'm sure the rest of the panelists will add to it as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think CIS is a great assessment framework. I think I see a lot in the retail segment is NIST CSF is another very popular assessment framework. I think the one thing that a lot of organizations do is they do a qualitative assessment. They don't necessarily do a quantitative assessment. And I think that's where the issue lies, is when you're reporting up to the board, when you're having conversations with senior leadership about what is the overall risk to the organization from a cyber perspective, they forget to talk about the quantitative result or consequence of some system going down. Yeah. And I think if we, as technologists, as cybersecurity focused people, we tend to think about stuff in the qualitative sense and not think about what are the nuts and bolts that our senior executives really care about, and that's the quantitative side of it. So if you can accurately depict the quantitative loss related to a system going down, and then use that on a framework like CSF or CIS, and then report that up to the board and say, hey, we would lose $10 million if this system went down for a day, or, and so forth. I think those are the types of assessments that are much more valuable than standard frameworks like CSF and CIS, because at the end of the day, those are very internally focused, and those are really help the IT organizations and the security organizations in our retailers. Doesn't necessarily help the board to understand what is the quantitative loss associated with an incident. So I think those are very important.
Yeah. Thank you, Arjun. Saurabh, Saurabh, go ahead.
In my experience, again, adding both Sai and Arjun's point, while we look into the assessment, internally, there's a lot of focus has been there for a while, more reliance on the internal audits than we do the final annual one. I think in our experience, we have broken down this into two parts. One is on the technology side, and the one is on the process side. So process side becomes a little bit more comprehensive, and there needs some people. But technology one, we have been able to automate it. So it's like always compliant. So for those critical systems, those critical data, we automated those things, evidence collections, the proofs, the effectiveness we have been able to monitor, and you can tweak it, weekly collection, monthly collection, or for some systems, even daily collections. And that could be from who access, what change is done, file touched, and all that. So that helps improve two ways. One, not only the effort towards the audit and compliance significantly went down, the confidence went up. Third, it kind of built a culture in the teams that, these are the systems, these are the activities we treat. So this we have seen a big difference as overall compliance status and ongoing monitoring.
All right, Caroline?
Yeah, I'll just add, the question was about how often you perform them.
Yeah,
I think most laws will say that you have to do it at least annually. Just to quickly answer that question, but I'm gonna expand a little bit and say, what is the difficulty with doing assessments? It's knowing and asking the right questions, and then finding and gathering all of the information. This takes a lot of time. And I think that is the biggest challenge that organizations have to frequently performing assessments. It's actually, this is a question close to my heart, because at ClearOps, this is what we do. We are a risk assessment platform, and we gather both public intelligence data as well as private information to create knowledge bases. That's what we do, because that is what we found the biggest challenges is asking those right questions and then getting that information out of people's heads.
Thank you. Thank you. So let's go to the Q&A, and my good friend Jake Dunn has asked a question. With so many avenues of cybersecurity that retailers can procure, from a values perspective, how is leadership evaluating these different options? Can you give us a glimpse into the C-suite deliberations, if you will?
I think we go back to what we were talking about here. So when I talk to my business partners, I never talk sort of nuts and bolts security language, right? We always talk in business terms, and those business terms are typically ROI based and or sort of risk avoidance based, right? So ROI based would be, hey, if I'm going to put a system in, it's going to have a return one way or the other, whether means I'm gonna improve the bottom line or improve the top line, or avoid some regulatory and or other sort of calamitous risk that would cost us a lot of money one way or the other, right? Either I'm increasing or I'm decreasing. So that's the kind of conversation. And I really think, building out a risk, an idea of risk. One idea that I think is really sort of started to catch hold, especially inside the enterprise risk communities, is an idea of reasonable risk, right? So it back to Arjun's idea of, hey, a quantitative analysis of these things. if we can come back and say, well, we're going to spend $1 million on this security control and or operational risk mediation, but it's only going to, if that thing happens, it's only going to cost us $500,000. Well, that's not a good, that's a bad ROI, right? And now we could say, well, yeah, but it's going to happen 10 times. Well, then, okay, now all of a sudden the ROI becomes better. So you guys, all are thinking in business terms, and that's sort of what we have to do as we're having these conversations is rank them from sort of most potentially possible down to least. And there's a number of good frameworks that do that. I particularly like the MITRE ATT&CK framework because it helps us narrow down the world of 5,000, 10,000 potential risks down to the 200 that are most likely to happen within retail, and then from there take that and map that to what's it going to cost us if that risk happened to us, and that's the exercise that we go through in order to come back to it. And then the last thing I would say is really listening to the business owners. Oftentimes the IT organizations and the security organizations don't really understand operationally what's at risk in the business. And so going and being a part of those team members and the conversations about what they consider risk is a really important piece of it, right? Because we might think we know, but the truth of the matter is that you're not going to know how the warehouse works until you get in there and understand it.
Anyone wants to add quickly for?
Yeah, I'll just add one aspect of it.
Sure.
I think risk transference is also very important when you think of value when it comes to a product or capability that you're bringing into your organization, right? And we all see, especially in the retail segment, there's a lot of very niche vendors out there that provide very valuable services. But I think it's important to understand if those products or capabilities that you're trying to acquire from those vendors will allow you to have some level of risk transference away from your organization over to that vendor or that service provider, right? And I think that is one thing that you can do as part of an assessment is, hey, if we were to go down, if we were to have an incident, if we were to have a breach, would this vendor be able to help offset some of the risk that we have by running their tool set in their environment? So I think that's another good, valuable way to determine whichever capability you're trying to acquire. Is it something that you can do to minimize the risk? And that is something that you can take to your senior leadership as well and say, yeah, this vendor is a valuable acquisition for us because we can offset some of our risk onto them and reduce some of the overall burden when using their tool set.
Yeah, at the risk of sounding very reductionist, I'm going to ask this. So from a, let's say, CISO perspective, what percentage of your risk should you transfer? What percentage, or let's say of your IT budget, should you spend on actual deterrence and protection? And what percentage would you, let's say, set aside for cyber insurance or something else? Yeah, I know it's a very complicated question and it's probably very contextual, but if you can give any kind of pointers to our audience, that'll be great.
Caroline looks like she has a thought.
On a lighter note, I would say that now we are combining detection and protection at the same tool sets now. So that's a new trend. We are not kind of going in different ways. Different teams got engaged. So that's the best thing to do now. That the system should be looked at as one whole ecosystem, and so the threat assessment and the risk mitigation. But coming to that specific point, it's a fact that when spend is considered, then there is the business and IT are not on the same page most of the time, right? So I think to figure out what is more critical, and that becomes our job as well from the technology side, that this data, this systems is more critical. So you want to spend more on this, and then identify. A lot of time people, they don't know what is their risk appetite. First, to define what is the risk appetite, and it will be defined by the system and then associated. I think that's the point to start with, and I don't think so. There is a number. It's literally varies by each environment, each customer.
Yeah, I think Sai and Caroline would agree. Sai, you want to say something?
Yeah, I would say there's a lot of variables here, right? So, operationally, the resiliency piece is so critical, right? Because that's where you can really lose a lot of money very quickly. But thanks to big improvements in our overall infrastructure, through the teams like TCS who are implementing, and vendors like Microsoft, who are, we feel a lot better about overall our ability to recover and keep going, in these arrangements. Now, I will say, like you threw in insurance. So, 5 years ago, everybody just relied on your insurance. Insurance was relatively inexpensive, and it had very high coverage. And nowadays, it's tripled or quadrupled or more in terms of overall cost. So yes, we still have to have it, and we're going to pay for it. But instead of, let's take a typical retailer, you're going to pay, $250,000 for a cyber thing. Now you're going to pay more like 3 times that. Well, all of a sudden the ROI becomes different, right? Because now I'm paying $750,000 for only covering the same amount of things. Well, then I really better get on getting some of the remediation and other things done. That's going to cost me money. And so it changes how the ROI can be impacted, because back just a few years ago, it didn't make a lot of sense necessarily to spend a whole bunch of money remediating inside my org because my insurance would cover it. And these days, if operationally I can keep moving and not get slowed down, and then the other risks I have are things like reputational risk and overall outside risk that are these larger context risks. That becomes something that we just need to focus on more. So, can I tell you a number and how much? I think we're swaying more towards remediating inside our orgs more these days because the insurance has gone up, and we have better tools to be able to drive those remediations. And I want to call Sir about, like, you're so 100% right about the automation and reporting piece. So I do assessments, for people now, and we typically look: is there a policy written? Is there a control implemented? Yeah. Then is that control automated? And then is that control reported? And these days, the control automated and the control reported are getting better and better. That used to almost never be the case. Yeah, we had a control in place. Yeah, we have a hardening guide for all our servers. But today I can automate that hardening guide. So anytime I spin up a server, it's going to be right and it's going to be hardened. And I've got a reporting on it so that I can see it, and I get a reporting on my whole infrastructure every week. And so that's a very different position than we were 5 years ago. And it's really improved our overall security posture, and that in the control language speak contributes to a more mature approach, right? Because you've got the policy, you've got the control implemented, now you've got automation around it, and now you've got reporting around it. And those two pieces are absolutely game changing. If you can get there, you can really drive a lot better security overall in the environment.
All right, thank you, Sai. So I promised that we were going to address 2 more questions, but it looks like we're a little bit short of time. So I first want to get to our students. So as you know, there are a few students in our audience, and what advice would you give them? So they are both. Some of them are in marketing. Some of them are in cybersecurity management or information security management. What advice would you give them regarding their career choice moving forward, either to a retailer, or maybe from a legal perspective, from a technology perspective, or from a management and consulting perspective?
I'll jump in real quick and say, if you're marketing, learn some cybersecurity. If you're cybersecurity, learn some marketing, because honestly,
Yes.
brand reputation, it's about both. And so in knowing both the metrics, the skill sets that are required for both these days is really important. One of the things I tell people all the time right now is, if you are in cybersecurity and you're a CISO or senior person and you're talking to the board, you should also be talking to your marketing department, maybe getting some metrics on how that security page that you've put together and is on the website, how that's performing, how many views you're getting, that kind of thing. But just a quick tidbit.
Thank you.
100% agree with that. I would say, so I'm your local nerd, right? I call myself a business professional nerd, and I would learn the business is sort of what she's saying, right? Like, if you're a nerd, learn the business. If you're a business person, learn the nerdy stuff. Cybersecurity is now a board level topic, and boards talk about the business and the business only. So you got to be able to frame the cybersecurity risks. And you've heard us all talking about it, for the whole last half of the session. You got to be able to frame those risks as business imperatives. And just let if you're a technical person, practice your business speaking skills, because nobody wants to hear about how many threats you've got or whatever. None of that is all that important to the business. It will be very important to your teams as you go in and lead them, and as you understand the threats. But you'll be a better overall technical leader if you learn the business.
Yeah, I agree. This business conversation, and because our technology team, when we work, then we need to understand that if we are securing a system for a retail business, say payment gateway, versus we are controlling or managing a system for a utility company who is controlling the transmission, these are very two different. The technology inside could be same, but their significance and consequences are very, very different. Very different. It's not about SLA, it's not about technology, it's about what does it mean to the business, and what is the impact on not only that business, but to the larger, sometime at a national level as well. So it's very, very important technology teams to understand the business. And when we define the solution, or hopefully new things are developed by this team who are listening, how it is going to help some business as well. It's not about how you improve the technology, but what's the purpose? How it is going to help the customer, or say particular business, or solve a problem. That I think that's a key.
Yeah,
Thank you, sir. Yeah.
The only thing I'll add is for folks in business, the most important thing I think is making sure that they have an accurate way of learning and touching different systems, right? And so what that means is, when you go out and you graduate, you get into your jobs, try and touch as many systems as you can, try and reach out to as many organizations as you can, try and see what different departments in your company are doing, and then map that back to what either technical or cyber or some sort of systems engineering approach that you can apply to that function. And then that will help you get a better understanding of the business systems that sort of was mentioning, that will help you then, if you do end up going into a cyber career, allows you to map what is important when it comes to a business and how they operate. So going out and learning as much as you can, and seeing all the different functions in the company. Why are they important? Why does the company have this function? What value do they bring to the organization? And then how you could apply a cybersecurity lens to that job function is the best way to start.
Thank you, Arjun. And I hope that each of your companies will come looking for interns and full-time employees from GMU at the next career fair. Yeah, thank you. So we have 4 more questions. So can we just fulfill my promise and answer the questions that Isaac and Kayla had? So Isaac's question was, are there regional consideration when it comes to cybersecurity for retailers? And I'm guessing this includes international, but I'll let you interpret the question as you see fit.
That's certainly the case. You know, GDPR, which is the EU privacy regulations, and it sort of started the ball rolling. I'll say in general, I consider cybersecurity and privacy kissing cousins. Right? You can't have good privacy without the security being, you know, top notch as well. And oftentimes the teams that are working on those. And it's a little different now, but at least the teams that are working on the operational pieces of it are going to be the same teams, especially if you're in very large retail environments, maybe not, but otherwise, yes. So I think so. And I'll just put my plug in for the NRF. You know, in the US, if you weren't in California, a lot of people are like, well, we don't have to worry about privacy. Well, that's not true anymore. And if you're a US only retailer, you need to worry about privacy. It is coming, across state by state. We really don't like that approach. We would really much rather have a national privacy regulation that could be driven by the federal, bureaucracy as it stands today. And the NRF works very hard on the Hill. And if anybody's interested, we have actually a privacy working group that students and retailers can get involved in and hear sort of the back room machinations of what's going on there. And I'd be happy to connect anybody who's interested in that.
Thank you, Sai. Anyone else on the panel?
The only thing I'll say with regards to regional requirements, in the US, I'm sure Sai and Caroline could probably talk more about this, but the way that the US kind of regulates is very different from the way that the EU regulates and regulatory capture in general. And so in Europe, there's a much more focused kind of proactive approach. In the US, it's a little bit more reactive, and they focus a lot more on, litigation and so forth to try and normalize what's happening. So I think but one thing is that there's a little bit more of a heavy hand in Europe around the ramifications if a retailer or an organization doesn't comply with privacy requirements and standards. And so fines are much higher, fines are much more frequent. I believe for every GDPR violation, it's like €125 or something like that per user per day or something. So it's a very different landscape in that segment. So in the US, it's a little bit more business focused. And then only really comes the concept of, did a business do you harm by exposing your data, or if there's a data breach, is very prevalent in the US. So you have to meet that bar of, did a business really actually cause you harm if your data was exposed in a breach? So those are the kinds of things that you have to consider regionally. I think the EU takes a much more concerted approach and concise approach into that, whereas the US doesn't do it as much.
Yeah, thank you so much, Arjun. And unfortunately, we are at 1 p.m. I would love to sit and talk with all of you and get more questions as well and answered as well. But thank you again so much to the panelists. Thank you to the Center for Retail Transformation for having this final presentation and panelists today.
Thank you for having
us.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Bye,
you,
everyone. Bye.
Bye.